to some extent, in the discussion in Washington, people who either view themselves as free traders or think they should be free traders, right, which is a different group of people, or don't want to challenge people who aren't free traders, will say, well, we have to make an exception because of national security. So it tends to kind of just create its own argument, right? It's just something that tends to happen. To me, the most fundamental thing is that, and I'm a national security hawk also, as you can imagine, right? I'm sure no one would have any doubt about that. But the first thing you don't want to do in national security, you clearly don't want to transfer weapon technology, and you don't want to give away your military secrets and all of that. Of course, everybody would agree with that. But I always say, but do you want to actually build the other guy's army? Do you want to create the Chinese Navy? Is that something we should be doing? Because that's what we're doing. We basically are funding. In other words, the amount of money they get from us is far bigger than they spend on their own army and navy every year. So I like to say we've built the greatest army, the biggest army, not the greatest, but the biggest army and the biggest navy in the world. And it's in China. So when you think about national security, the one element is all this kind of bombs and guns and strategy and all this kind of stuff, which is very important. But the other side of it is, do you give money to the other side? If I had said in the Cold War, I think we ought to give $100 billion to the Soviet Union, right? I mean, everybody would say, well, this guy's obviously not a serious person. Or in the Second World War, just go through where you want. But that is what we are doing. So there's the national security question is two things to me. And the one that gets the least attention, and that's, in my opinion, probably the most important, is that we are literally not only buying their bombers, we are paying for the technology to be developed to make the bombers. I mean, is that like the essence of national security? But yet you'll talk to a lot of hard power people and they'll say, and I'll give you good examples, the Wall Street Journal, they'll say, yeah, you can argue whether they actually believe China is a threat. To the extent I do, probably don't. But they will acknowledge, yeah, they're a threat. But of course we should continue to trade with them and give them 8 or 9 or whatever the number is, hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And you think, how does that make any sense? I mean, what are you paying attention to? Don't you realize that if you make the first decision, this is an adversary that wants nothing but bad things for us and is a genuine threat to our existence and to our way of life? Why would you then say, oh, but it's more important that we get that bloody third television that's in the basement right up against the grandma's clock, or that your T-shirt is, you can get that 14th T-shirt $1 cheaper. I mean, it's just, when I think about it, I think you're not serious people if you think like that, right? Serious people don't think like that. Serious people say you have a problem, you address the problem. So we can get into why I'm worried about China. I mean, the rest of your question, but on the national security, it is troubling to me that is that lens. But I'm willing to adopt that lens as long as people are willing to broaden it, to say, okay, fine. Now we need, I always say, strategic decoupling. We need strategic decoupling. That's not no trade, but it means we ought to have balanced trade. And we ought not to trade in technology. And we ought not to be sending huge amounts of investments there, which are designed to help them or allow them to have investments come here, every dollar of which is approved because they believe it'll help them net, right? So when I talk about strategic decoupling, it's to get around, it is in the context of national security.
So as it relates to the national security and China question, I think one of the most prevalent things right now that many people are discussing and signing legislation and that sort of thing is chip manufacturing. How are you thinking about that as we, approach having another conservative administration? What should conservatives do about chip manufacturing?
So I mean, this is another one. Once again, you can say where did this craziness come from? Like that we're against subsidies. Now, our operating assumption should be that we're not going to subsidize industry unless it's compelling, right? That should be our position because we know it's inefficient and we know you can't pick winners very well and the like. So that should be our start. But the notion that's out there that somehow Republicans don't believe in subsidies or that the great American industries came up without subsidies is just palpably wrong, right? I mean, there would be no railroads. There'd be no, the whole railroad was a real estate play. I mean, Apple's phone screen was developed by U.S. money. I mean, we have to be realistic. Now, once again, I say if you start off with the proposition that we're going to subsidize everything, you're going to end up screwing up your economy and going into debt. But for those of you who work on the Hill, you've gone into debt without subsidizing. So you can shows you can do it any number of ways. But so you get to the certain technologies that you can't afford to lose on. And it's easy to find out what those technologies are. China, several years ago, put out a plan. And they called it Made in China 2025. And they listed 10 technologies. And they said, we're going to be the leader in the world, independent, not integrated with the U.S. and the like, independent on these areas. And they're working their way through them. And of course, on that list are semiconductors. And you can't imagine, you can't make a tank. Forget an F-35. You can't make a tank. You won't be able to make a rifle. A high-tech rifle without chips before long. So of course we have to have chips. Now, that is, and I supported that legislation. That isn't to say it's flawless. I mean, I'm sure that if any of us sat down with no influence, we could have found 15 ways to make it a better bill. But the people that sat down had the influence, right? So, and that's one of the things Senator Dole used to say when we would pass something that wasn't perfect, which none of the stuff you pass is perfect. He used to say, but that's why the Congress is staying in session. That's why we're going to have a Congress next year, right? We're going to be able to sort some of these problems out. But for sure, you can't afford to lose chips. We essentially invented and developed chips, and we make whatever the number is, Michael knows it, maybe 12% of our own chips, and 0%. We have no technology to make the small chips. We're at least 2 generations. We cannot make them at all in the United States. Now, can you realizing that every single piece of your military hardware has chips in it? Not to mention every car. Can you possibly say, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm pure? Right, that's just self-defeating.
I think the CHIPS Act is a very interesting petri dish to think through a lot of these issues because some of the potential political constraints were very relevant as well. I think you saw, there are many fantastic senators that have spoken very eloquently on these issues over the years, like Senator Rubio, Senator Hawley, who ended up deciding to vote against the CHIPS Act because they thought that the issues with the bill surpassed the potential benefits. And you saw more moderate senators supporting it, at least on the Republican side. And then on the flip side, on the implementation, I think you saw some of the potential attendant concerns that would come out of any industrial policy or agenda of reshoring in the United States being managed by the left, where there are certain like woke diversity priorities and some other things put into it. How did you think about the aftermath of the CHIPS Act? What did it tell you about the politics of the situation and what future reforms might look like or should look like?
Well, I mean, so whether you voted for it or against, you have to decide what you're focusing on, right? If you're focusing on what I said, that is to say that we lose. I mean, look at China's probably spending $500 billion on this. Korea is spending $200 billion. Japan, $250 to develop chips. Europe, $200 or $300 billion. And we're not going to do anything. and the ingenuity of the American. I mean, it's just completely crazy. But so if you're looking at the need for that, you vote for it. If you're looking at the fact that the left larded it up with things that are not only a waste of money, but are actually against our culture, right? Then you could see voting against it. But then you would say, oh, but if it's done properly, I'll vote for it. All right. You know, that's a perfectly fine position. In my opinion, though, the urgency was greater than that. And so to me, you vote for it, you get started, you get these fabs here, and then in the next election, you sort out all this garbage, right? And that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to sort out all this garbage. And as I say, by no means do I think, or do I think the bill is perfect. But that is why Congress should be here. And if you had a House and a Senate that were Republican and a Republican in the White House, you could sort this thing out in 3 or 4 months. And my view is you probably should do that. And it is so bad because you had all three together with no counterweights on the other side.